The book of Isaiah, chapter 1 and verse 3. The ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib. But Israel doth not know. My people doth not consider.
So, in the Bible, it identifies an ox and an ass who knows their owner, knows their master's crib. But God says his people don't know, meaning they don't know who they are, which is relevant for yourselves as it was for us. We would have many of the same answers. African, then they say, well, what tribe? I don't know. We would know it's always a guessing game for us. Well, I want to open up with the identifying God's chosen people. All right, we're going to open up with that. Many times we have thoughts about our various nationalities. For example, I know you're looking at the flyers. However, what would you say your racial origin is?
I would say that my racial origin is that of Africa.
Okay, African. Young lady, what would you say? African? And yourself? What would you say? Huh? Indian. Okay. Young lady, what would you say? You don't know. Okay. What would you say? Ethiopian, Nigerian. And you? African? African and Caribbean. Now, y'all know that those of you that claim African descent, you know there are about 3,000 African tribes. So then it gets a little more complicated. So, okay, what tribe?
I would say I'm from the tribe of the...
You said you would say.
The Uba or Igbo.
So that means you don't know.
But I don't know, of course.
Young lady, you don't know. Who else said African? You said African? You don't know. You said it. Now, you mentioned Ethiopian and Nigeria. Okay, we're going to come back to that. That's good. And you have no idea. Very good. I want to open up 1 and 3. I'm sorry. Isaiah 1 verse 3. And then I'm going to show you some illustrations. Isaiah chapter 1 verse 3.
The book of Isaiah, chapter 1 and verse 3. The ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib. But Israel doth not know. My people doth not consider.
So, in the Bible, it identifies an ox and an ass who knows their owner, knows their master's crib. But God says his people don't know, meaning they don't know who they are, which is relevant for yourselves as it was for us. We would have many of the same answers. African, then they say, well, what tribe? I don't know. We would know, it was always a guessing game for us. So now, we've always been taught, I know coming up when I was into Afrocentricity, it was always said that the Bible is the white man's book. Have you ever heard that? The Bible was written by the white man? So I always heard that. So after I ran from Christianity, I went into Afrocentricity, and I hated the Bible. Didn't want to hear nothing about it. And then the brothers came and they started to show me various things and opened my eyes to look at it with new eyes. How many of y'all saw the movie Birth of a Nation? Y'all saw that? One sister. Brother, you didn't see it? What's going on with our people? You sisters, make sure y'all see that movie. Very good movie. It shows you the origin of Christianity, how the white man used black Christian males to subdue the slaves mentally. And in the film, it shows you how Nat Turner started to see the Bible with new eyes and how it was not saying what the white Christians taught the slaves it was saying. This is the standpoint we're coming from, and this is the standpoint of what the Bible is about. The Bible is nothing with what you think it's saying. Of universal love, what else does it say? What else do they say? Universal love for everybody. The Bible's everybody's book. The laws are done away with. That's not biblical at all. Many of us, we quote the Bible, certain passages, and in the movie Nat Turner mentions, he says, they taught me to quote and read only certain passages. He said, but in my alone time, I was able to read more on my own, and I saw things they didn't want me to see. So, let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 28. Let's go to the first slide, please. I have the scriptures on the screen for you so y'all can see for yourselves exactly what the Bible is saying. And I'll have Captain Isaac, can you come over here for us, Center? I'll have Captain Isaac read it aloud.
Deuteronomy 28 verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee.
So now we want to find out who is Moses talking to, because in church there's always talking to everybody. Everybody didn't come out of Egypt with Moses. Get chapter 27, verse 1. See who's talking.
Chapter 27, verse 1. And Moses with the elders of Israel commanded the people, saying, keep all the commandments which I command you this day.
So now we have identified Moses is talking to who? Israel. Understand that? He's talking to Israel. So now what we're about to identify is who is Israel? Is it the Caucasians in Israel today? Or is it the blacks that went over here in slavery throughout the Caribbean, all places like that? Let's find out. Next slide, please. So we're going to identify the curses. Numbers verse 16, read that.
Verse 16. Cursed shalt thou be in the city.
So the one curse is that the Israelites would be cursed in whatever city they came into. So remember, the Israelites had just came out of Egypt, which is in Africa, northeast Africa. They just came out of Egypt from under Pharaoh, Ramses II. They're in the wilderness. Now Moses is telling the Israelites, if you break God's commandments, these are some of the curses that will come upon you and overtake you. One curse is that you shall be cursed in the city. Read on.
And cursed shalt thou be in the field.
Next slide. And cursed shalt thou be in the field. So here in the city, like for example, in New York City, you have the famous Wall Street. I'm sure you've all heard of Wall Street, where you had a huge slave market located where Wall Street reached the East River. It was established in 1711 as a place where enslaved blacks and Native American Indians could be hired or purchased. A lot of people don't realize Native American Indians were sold as slaves right along with blacks. Next slide, please. Still dealing with the city. Thousands of blacks, Latinos, Native American Indians were held in bondage and sold in the early colonial settlements of New France, Quebec, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and Upper Canada. Next slide. This part here, cursed shall thou be in the field. As you see in the illustration, you have the slaves working in the cotton fields. Next slide. Still dealing with the field, they forced us in slavery to work the sugarcane fields, the cotton fields, tobacco fields. Next slide. Verse 17 again.
Verse 17. Cursed shall be thy basket and thy store.
Meaning your businesses. Next slide. Verse 18.
Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body and the fruit of thy land, the increase of thy kind and the flocks of thy sheep.
Next slide. Verse 19.
Verse 19. Cursed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shalt thou be when thou goest out.
Meaning cursed shall you be when you're born. You were born not knowing who you are, and when you die, you would die not knowing who you are. That's a curse. When you go to many of the other colleges, many of the students know their history, their origin. It's only black colleges where there's always confusion. Sometimes we'd hand out paper and ask them to write down their racial origin, and you get at least 25 different answers. It's total confusion. Some people get to the point when they fill out job applications where it says white, Asian, non-black, black, and the other races would proudly mark their status or their origin, their racial origin. And black people are the only ones that go, well, I'll put, you refuse to do it. We don't want to sign what race we are, feeling it may hinder us from employment. Next slide. Verse 20.
Verse 20. The Lord shall send upon thee cursing, vexation, and rebuke in all that thou settest thine hand unto for to do, until thou be destroyed.
Meaning destroyed as a people, go ahead.
And until thou perish quickly, because of the wickedness of thy doing.
Notice, Moses is getting on the Israelites for the wickedness of our doings. He says he's warning us, if we break God's laws, these are the things that will happen to you. When we came out of Egypt, the Israelites were a mighty race. It tells you that the nations paid King David and King Solomon tribute. That's how mighty we were. After that, however, we went and broke God's laws. Next slide, please. So now remember, this Bible was written over 3,000 years ago. This part that we're reading, let me say it like that. What Moses wrote here is written over 3,000 years ago. Next slide. Let me get to verse, now this is dealing with cursed shalt thou be in a city. There's Tulsa, Oklahoma, bottom left, Black Wall Street. Many of you have read about it, correct? You've read about it? Many times Caucasians will say to you, Why don't you get your own, do your own thing? Why don't you go get into your own city? They don't mean that. The evidence that they don't mean that was Tulsa, where our ancestors said, okay, we will do our own. We did it, we were very successful. They dropped dynamite from planes and killed many, many, many of us. Many articles on it. They haven't done a movie on it yet. I'm waiting for that. So that's when they get on you and say, why don't you do your own thing, become an entrepreneur, separate from whites. They don't mean that, because we are the workforce in America. Without us working for them, the economy would go very, very bad. Next slide. Okay, verse 21, please.
Verse 21, the Lord shall make the pestilence cleave unto thee, until he have consumed thee from off the land, whither thou goest to possess it.
So now pestilence, many of you read about the what happened during Plymouth Rock, when Britain came over and they gave the Native American Indians blankets with smallpox. They did the same thing in Mexico, and they inflicted and then put disease on them, and that's how they helped overthrow them. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, verse 23, let's read that.
And thy heaven that is over thy head shall be brass, and the earth that is under thee shall be iron.
So now, if you all know about a little bit about slavery, the slaves had brass bells over their head, the runaway slaves, brass bells, and iron shackles on their ankles. All right, next slide, please. Next slide. There's some key points I want. Give me verse 25.
The Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemy.
Remember that word. Enemies there. Remember that word. Go ahead.
Thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shalt be removed into all kingdoms of the earth.
You see that part where it says, we shall flee 7 ways and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth? Next slide. Here's an example of fleeing 7 ways and being removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. This is the transatlantic slave trade, okay? If you notice, they got some of us from Senegal, Sierra Leone, the west coast of Africa, including the Congo, Angola, South Africa as well. And they brought us over to Buenos Aires, El Salvador, Central America, North America. Now this is a very limited map. We have other maps where it shows they took us to East India, they took us to Iran, they took us to Iraq. They separated us all over the globe to make sure we would never unite as a race again. Watch this, next slide. Okay, here, this is from the sub-Saharan slave trade, which was just before the transatlantic slave trade, where the Islamic Arabs enslaved us. They made a pact with Europe, as well as certain African nations, certain of them, okay? And they helped bring us into slavery. Next slide, please. Next slide. I want to get to some key points. Next slide. Give me verse 32. Yeah, right here. Let's start at verse 32. Go ahead.
Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand.
This is amazing because many times they say the Bible's for everybody. Everybody on the earth did not go into slavery. That's a misconception. Everybody did not go into slavery. Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto, notice 2 words there, another people. That means another race of people. That's what it means, another people. And thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long. If you ever watched the movie Roots, Mandingo, Drums, even 12 Years a Slave, even Birth of a Nation, they show you examples of when our children were taken from us, we did not have the power to get them back. That's what it means. That bottom part, and there shall be no might in thine hand. We would have no economic might or military might to unite our race again. That's what the prophecy is. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide.
6. The Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known. And there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone.
So when we were brought over here, we were serving other gods. Gods that don't look like us, Caucasian gods, even made of wood and stone. We got the white image of Jesus, Mary, St. Peter, St. Paul, so forth and so on. as well as Allah, the in the cobblestone. Next slide, please. Okay, verse 37.
And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations whither the Lord shall lead thee.
That's a very good precept. Many people don't know what that means, though. I'm going to show an example in the Bible of what it means. Give me Daniel 1 verse 6. I'm going to show you what it means. Daniel 1 verse 6. Daniel chapter 1 and verse 6. I'm going to show you what they did to us in slavery to explain a proverb and a byword.
Daniel chapter 1 verse 6. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego.
So they changed the names of the slaves. That's what happened. So now, the young lady here said that she was Ethiopian in Nigeria. The word Ethiopia, you know the origin of that word? It's a Greek word. It means faces burnt. It's Greek. Greek or has nothing to do with us at all. It has a meaning to us that fits us, but the word itself has nothing to do with us, as well as the word Nigeria. Go to the next slide. Watch this. Next slide. Okay, here's some proverbs. When the slaves came over, they changed our identities. They called some of us African Americans. The term West Indian, do any of you know what that word means? West Indian. The word Indian, you know what it means?
Yeah, because they believe that they were going to India, but it was in the West.
You know what the word Indian means?
No.
Okay, it comes from the Latin word indio, which means servant, slave. So when you say West Indian, you're saying Western slave. But you have many people cheer, I'm West Indian. You don't know what you're saying. Okay, then you have Puerto Rican. That's another common what they did to the slaves there in Puerto Rico, which means port of riches. Puerto Ricans are some of the poorest people today. Don't feel offended if you're Puerto Rican in here. But that's why many people come to the Americas. Cuban, Mexican, Dominican, which means Sunday, Colombian, Brazilian. These are all the names that the Caucasians put on their slaves. Then they gave us their last names. What's your last name?
Big, yeah.
Okay. What's yours? Stephen. What's yours? Okay. These are all names of the slave masters who owned you. And many black people we have was family reunions. You heard of that? Family reunion. Oh, I'm from the Miller family. And do you know what they did to the slaves? So if you were a runaway, how would they know you belong to the Miller or Stevenson or whatever? They branded the name of your owner in your back. He belongs to the Millers. She belongs to the Stevensons. So the name of your slave owner was branded in your back. That's what they did here in America, Britain, the Caribbean, so forth and so on. So if you notice all these proverbs and bywords, so Moses is initially saying your identities would change in slavery. Your names would be changed. So let's look at it so far. Your sons and daughters would be given to another people, and their names would be changed. Watch this. Let's get some more. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. I just want to get to some key points that I know they're going to be familiar with. Okay, verse 41. Read verse 41, please.
Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity.
So Moses says your sons and daughters will go into captivity. You won't have a time to enjoy them. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide.
And shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed. Because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. And they shall be upon thee for a sign.
Meaning the curses of this Bible would be upon you for a sign. What does a sign do? A sign identifies what way to go, who you are. For example, here's two signs at the bottom of this slideshow here. Next exit, God's way. So you know if you want to go God's way, you would bear that way. This sign over here says no exit, my way. That's, you know, they teach black people to be individuals, not solidarity. They teach us to be individuals here. So we go, I'm gonna do my own thing. Then we end up in jail, prison, so forth and so on. So now, a sign identifies a direction, a place of being. So the signs in the Bible is A, so far, your sons and daughters will be given to another people. You would become proverbs and bywords, meaning your identities would be changed. Those two major signs. I just want the major ones. Show me the next sign. Read verse 48. This is verse 40 is what I want y'all to see.
Verse 48. Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies.
What's that word?
Enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck, until he have destroyed thee.
Very important, that verse. Look at verse 40. I want you to read it for yourselves. You can see it real good. So, let's go to a slide to show you some illustrations of what that verse is saying. Next slide. This is serving your enemy for hunger, okay? Your food, okay? Your EBT. Next slide. This is what it means serving your enemy for thirst, meaning the waters that you drink, you have to go to your enemies. Next slide. This is what it means when it says you're going to serve your enemies for nakedness, meaning the clothing that we all wear. We don't make it. We don't get the textiles from ourselves. We get it from other nations. Next slide. And in want of all things, meaning anything you want, God says you have to get it from your enemy. That includes medication. That includes money to buy a home. Okay? It includes education, how to read, how to write. You have to get it from the man who conquered you. Next slide. Read that bottom part again. And he
shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck, until he have destroyed thee.
This really solidifies who the Israelites are. Yokes of iron upon the necks of the slaves. This did not happen to all races on the earth. We have to stop at the thought that everybody was a slave. We hear it in some colleges. Hello, is this a college? Nobody knows that this happened to us. This didn't happen to the Chinese. It did not happen to the Greeks. It did not happen to the Arabs. We have to stop and face reality. This is our history. Read it again.
And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck, until he have destroyed thee.
Y'all know what that word until he have destroyed thee means? You would have yokes of iron on your neck until he have destroyed you. Now you're not physically dead, I'm looking at you. So what does that mean? Right, you're destroyed here. That's why you never have unity amongst the black or Latino races. Never have unity, never. You never see such a thing. It's unheard of. This is why black families are dysfunctional. We are always baby mama drama all over the place. Baby daddy. Everything with us, there's no solidarity. Why? Because we've been destroyed as a people. How did they do that? Why did they take the yokes of iron off? This is what they did. I'm gonna give you two brief examples. Well, Abe, I'll use Abraham Lincoln because of emancipation. I'm just talking about here in America. Well, Abe, if you take the yokes of iron off the slaves' necks, they might revolt. Well, maybe not, because we divided them up into various nationalities. They won't unite. Some of them are African Americans. Some of them are Ethiopians. Some of them are Haitians. Some of them are West Indians. There's no unity there. Well, suppose there's a clever Negro amongst them, and they realize that they're all one people. That won't happen. We'll do the next thing. Give them religion. Call this one Roman Catholic. Let that one over there be Pentecostal. Let that one over there be Methodist. Let that one over there be Mormon. Divide them in religions. Okay. Suppose that don't work, Abe. Politics. This one's Republican. That one's conservative. That one's liberal. That one is Democratic. There's always divide and conquer. It keeps us separated. So I want to read that part again. And he
shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck, until
you would have yokes of iron on your neck until what?
He have destroyed thee.
We've been destroyed as a race. We have totally been destroyed. You know, we've read this Bible all our years, but never realized this was in there. We've been looking in libraries trying to find our identity, and it's been right here in our hands all this time. Watch this. Next slide, please. Okay, verse 49.
The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. A nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand.
So I wonder who this is talking about. What nations are as swift as the eagle? What nations have the symbol of the eagle as their symbol? You know? Oh, United States, very good. There were some other nations. You had Spain, you had Rome, you had Greece. Next slide. Here's some examples. Okay, you even had Nazi Germany. Okay. E pluribus unum, which is on your dollar bill, which means out of many, one. Okay? Next slide. Verse 50, read verse 50.
A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young.
Next slide. Next slide. It was making reference to 70 AD when Rome came against us. Next slide, please. Next slide. Let's jump down to give me verse 64, please. Wait, go back. I saw Zika. I want to talk about that briefly. Go back. Go back. Okay, read verse 61.
Verse 61. Also, every sickness and every plague which is not written in the book of this law, then will the Lord bring upon thee until thou be destroyed.
So, for breaking God's commandments, the Lord told Moses to tell us, if you break my commandments, not only would your sons and daughters be taken from you, not only would their nationality be changed, not only would they have yokes of iron upon their neck, but I'm going to send disease upon them. Next slide. So now we got the Zika virus. Many of you heard of AIDS. It's not in the Bible, but it's upon our people. Zika virus, patented 1947 by the Rockefeller Foundation. Okay, but a lot of you may not have. You can Google it, look it up. These are patented diseases. For some reason, they afflict us. Remember when AIDS, what was the other? Ebola. If y'all remember, you had certain white people catch Ebola, but there was a cure for them. Not for the black man. They said, oh, we ran out of the cure. And I'm like, hello, none of the so-called black leaders see this going on? Nobody sees this? Black man die of AIDS, Ebola, white man cured of Ebola. So now you have Zika hitting Central America and now parts of Florida. In Miami, next slide, please. Plagues, diabetes, these are certain things, racial things that pretty much hit black people. Next one, please. Next slide. Next slide. All right. Verse 64.
And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people.
That's the transatlantic slave trade. That's the sub-Saharan slave trade.
From the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone.
We never knew images of white people as our gods. That was never, ever in history until we came on this side of America, where we worship a white Jesus, Mary, rosary beads, things of that nature. Next slide, please. Okay, these are the other gods that we serve. I want you to write the name of this book down. You see at the bottom left, it says The Borgias by Marion Johnson. You might have it in the school library, where she illustrates what happened during the Renaissance era and how Leonardo da Vinci was hired by the Catholic Church to paint Caesar Borgia as the Renaissance image of Jesus Christ. This was in the late 1400s. Okay, and she shows the illustrations. Next slide, please. This is his name. He was the model. He was the second son of Pope Alexander VI. He was the model Leonardo da Vinci used. I'll read it here. Caesar Borgia. He was the illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, and his long-term mistress, Venosa de Catani. He is the model for the white image of Jesus Christ, replacing the true image of Jesus and creating lasting confusion to our people. Because in the Bible, Jesus Christ, we'll read it in a few minutes, is described as a black man having woolly hair. That's what the Bible describes him as. And the churches have been taught, don't read that to the slaves. Why? Because they might uprise. So don't read that. And this is what you'll find out in the movie Birth of a Nation also. I keep plugging that movie. You need to give me some money. Give me the next slide. Next slide. Okay, very important verse 68, Cap.
And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again.
The word Egypt means bondage. I'm going to show you that in a few minutes, but read it again.
And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt.
Bring you into bondage.
Again, with ships.
With what?
With ships.
Go ahead.
By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there,
once you got off the ships,
you shall be sold unto your enemies.
So the ships we got off and was sold, these is talking about slave ships. It's not a yacht, it's not a cruise liner, it's a slave ship. You get off a slave ship and are sold. Read that whole verse again.
And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you.
So now let's see some illustrations. Next slide. Okay, here's an example of a slave ship, okay, during the 1600s. Next one. This is an example of the slave ships. Okay, the top right, we got off the slave ships, we were sold to our enemies. Next slide. Okay, Exodus 20:2 explains what the word Egypt means. In case you were wondering, why did I say that Egypt means bondage or house of bondage? Read that for us.
Exodus 20:2. I am the Lord thy